Hello again. I've been asked to do a video about grief. Not just the grief of someone dying, but the grief that we may all feel about the various losses that we're going through at this difficult time. Now, there's no handbook to grief, there's no right or wrong way to grieve, but there may be some healthy and not so healthy ways of dealing with the grieving process. Firstly, a question that might seem obvious. What is grief? Well, grief is just a natural response to loss. It's the emotional suffering that we feel when something or someone that we love is taken away. And sometimes that feeling of loss can be overwhelming. There are many different symptoms of grief. We may experience extreme emotions so that we feel like we're going crazy, feeling like we're in the middle of a bad dream, or maybe questioning our religious or spiritual beliefs. We might experience feelings of shock or disbelief, where we might not be able to take in what was going on. We might feel sadness. Sadness is, I think, the obvious symptom of grief, but it's far from the only thing that we feel. We may also feel regret and guilt, regret about things that we did or didn't do and say, or we might feel guilty about our own emotions. We might feel that they're somehow wrong or we're being selfish by feeling them. We may also feel anger. Even if the loss was nobody's fault, we might feel angry or resentful. Fear is another one we might experience. It's a very natural response to grief. A significant loss can trigger a host of worries and fears. We might feel anxious or helpless or insecure. We may even have panic attacks. And with the news, and especially news from unreliable sources, that can add to our fear at this difficult time. But there are also some physical symptoms of grief. We might experience tiredness or nausea, lowered immunity, weight loss or weight gain, aches and pains, or insomnia. Grieving is a highly individual experience. How we grieve depends on a lot of things, like our personality, our life experience, our faith, and how significant the loss is to us. But however it manifests in us and however we process it, the grieving process takes time. Healing happens gradually. It can't be forced or hurried, and there's no normal timetable to grieving. Whatever your grief and grief experience, it's important to be patient with yourself and to allow the process to unfold naturally. I want to take some time in this video to look at some myths around grieving and grief, some wrong beliefs that can actually make this time even more difficult for us. Some of these beliefs can even be damaging. Firstly, some people think that grief only happens when someone dies, and that's not true. Any loss can cause grief, including divorce or a relationship breakup, loss of health, losing a job, loss of financial stability, a miscarriage, retirement, death of a pet, or loss of a cherished dream about what we imagine our future might be like. A loved one's serious illness, the loss of a friendship, the loss of feeling safe after a trauma, or even selling and moving from the family home can cause grief to be triggered. And now maybe we have an experience of loss of our social life as we have to isolate ourselves, loss of that concert we've been looking forward to going to, loss of seeing your mother on Mother's Day. For those at school, there's the loss of the last day of school, loss of a prom, loss of a concert you're performing in, and one that not everyone might like to admit to, but the loss of exams. If you've been working hard all year, you're missing the chance to prove it, and all of these can trigger grief. Our second myth is that sometimes it feels like when you're experiencing grief that if you start crying, you won't be able to stop. This is a very common one, and you just have to trust yourself and your ability to cope. You can do this. It may hurt and it may be difficult, but you can do it. And if you allow yourself to feel the pain and cry, you'll find that it helps. Our next myth is that the pain will go away faster if we ignore it. That's simply not true. Trying to ignore our pain will only make it worse in the long run. For real healing to take place, it's necessary to face our grief and actively deal with it. Similar to the last myth, the next one is that it's important to be strong in the face of a loss. Man up, some people might say. Feeling sad or frightened or lonely is a normal reaction to grief and loss. Crying doesn't mean you're weak, and you don't need to protect your family or friends by putting on a brave front. Showing your true feelings can actually help others and help yourself. I work with bereaved families a lot, and they often say they don't want the children to see them upset. But it can actually help children to see that you're upset, that you can express it, and that emotion, and you can survive it at the end as well. So in the last few points, I've been saying how it's healthy to allow yourself to get upset, allow yourself to cry if you feel you need to. But there is also another myth about crying. Some people think that if you don't cry, you're not really experiencing the grief, that you aren't sorry about the loss. And it's true that crying is a normal response to sadness, but it's not the only one. Those who don't cry may feel the pain just as deeply as others and may be processing it just as well. They simply have other ways of showing it and expressing their grief. And in families, this can often cause tension if one family member grieves by crying and one doesn't. We can both be just as upset but respond totally differently. My next point is probably especially relevant in bereavements, but it may be the case in other griefs too. Some people imagine that moving on with your life means forgetting about the loss. And some people want to hold on to their grief because they feel that holding on to it is holding on to the person or thing that they've lost. But moving on means accepting your loss, but that's not the same as forgetting. You can move on with your life and keep the memory of someone or something that you've lost as an important part of you. In fact, as we move through life, these memories can become more and more important in defining who we are. Finally, if you've read or done some research on grief, you might have heard of the 5 stages of grief. And that's going to be my final myth, the myth that grief has 5 stages. Someone called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote the 5 stages of grief model based on her studies of the feelings of patients facing terminal illness. And her 5 stages are, firstly, denial. This can't be happening to me. Anger. Why is this happening to me? Bargaining. Make this not happen and in return I will. Depression. I'm just too sad to do anything. And finally, acceptance. I'm at peace with what has happened. Now, these 5 stages do describe the experience that many people do recognise. And if you fit into this pattern, it may be helpful to know that you're not alone, that this is common. But not everyone fits. And those who don't fit into those categories can often find it quite alienating to think they're doing something wrong. But grief is an individual experience. You don't have to fit into those boxes. So while grieving and loss is an inevitable part of life, there are ways to help cope with the pain and come to terms with our grief and process it and find a way to pick up the pieces and move on with life. Firstly, it's really important to acknowledge the pain. Just feel it. It's horrible. It's a nasty process and we have to go through it. Allow yourself to get upset. Allow yourself to cry if that's what helps. Allow yourself to have a shout if that helps. But we have to experience and feel the pain before we can move on from it. Also, we need to understand that our grieving process will be unique to us. We might not do it the same as other members of our family, as our best friend, as someone that we feel that we've got so much in common with. We still might grieve completely differently. It doesn't mean your grief is more valid than theirs or their grief is more valid than yours. We're all different and process our grief differently. Next, it is crucial to seek out support from the people that care about us. Face-to-face is difficult right now, but get on the phone, text, Skype, FaceTime, whatever way we can get in touch with people. It's really, really important to keep in contact with other people. And it's really important at this time to support ourselves emotionally by taking care of ourselves physically. The mind and the body are connected. We need to take care of our bodies as well at this difficult time when it might be easy just to spend all day in our pajamas if we're isolating at home and just watch Netflix all day, which might be fun for a day or two, but ultimately won't be what helps us move on. So the 2 most important things to take away from this video is, firstly, don't let anyone tell you how to feel. And don't tell yourself how you should be feeling either. Just feel it, experience it, and know that it's valid. Your grief is your own, and no one else can tell you when it's time to move on or get over it. Also, most crucially of all, stay connected with friends and family. We may need to be isolated physically at this time, but we need people around by phone or text or video call to maintain our mental health and process our grief. We'll only get through this together. Thank you.